So brick is known for its durability. Human beings have been using brick for at least the last 10,000 years. It's likely longer. We've seen it in Turkish ruins from about 7,000 BCE. Humans have been firing brick to make it durable for at least the last 6,000 years. We've been using it in the United States since the early 17th century. I think of late, a few key attributes have come to the forefront. It's sustainable, it's strong, and it's versatile. So the neat thing about brick is most of us think of brick and we say traditional, but a lot of architects use it in contemporary architecture. It's recyclable, it adds resale value, it's one of the most durable materials on earth, and it creates aesthetic opportunities not otherwise found in other building materials. So, tonight we're going to take an in-depth look at 4 case studies and hear from some very talented architects responsible for the work. Each exemplifies a way in which brick was used to achieve unique design through intricate and thoughtful details. So I'd like to invite our panelists to come on up. So starting directly at my right is Isaac Daniel Astrakhan, AIA Lead AP. Isaac Daniel has been with Stephen B. Jacobs Group since 1998 when he started as the project manager for Hotel Giraffe. Since then, he's worked on many different hospitality and residential projects, including 325 Fifth Avenue, Edge in Williamsburg, 200 Lafayette Street, and Gainsport Park Avenue Hotel. He's recently completed Alta LIC, a 43-story residential tower in Long Island City, and Citizen M, New York Bowery Hotel, the tallest modular hotel in the world. Prior to joining the firm, Mr. Astrakhan worked for Didier Lepedon, Chief Architect and Inspector General of Historic Monuments in France. Mr. Astrakhan graduated from Columbia College in 1990 and received his Master of Architecture degree from Harvard's Graduate School of Design in 1995. Originally from the village of Gourd in the south of France and Detroit, Michigan. Mr. Astrakhan resides in Battery City with his wife and son. He serves on the board of Downtown United Soccer Club and is a member of the Hudson River Park Advisory Council Executive Committee. Tonight, we will focus on Stephen B. Jacob Group's Morgan Park project in Mineola, New York. Next to Isaac Daniel is Matthias Milwaukee. Matthias is an architect and founder of Everyday Studio. He received his Bachelor of Architecture from Carleton University and his Master of Architecture from the University of Toronto. Everyday Studio is a collaborative design space dedicated to the research of domestic living, prototypes, and housing design, predicated on the belief that architecture of all scales holds the potential to turn the everyday mundane into something wonderful and unpredictable. The studio devotes its efforts to creating spaces that are thoughtful, engaging, and timeless. Its work has been recognized in various architectural media, including Design, Dwell, Ottawa Magazine, and Geo-HBA Housing Design. Matthias also has professional experience from several prominent Canadian offices, with current work ranging from multi-unit housing, multi-use recreational facilities, and post-secondary institutional buildings. Matthias lives in Toronto. Tonight, we will focus on Everyday Studios, each housed in Manotick, Ontario. Sitting next to Matthias is Steve Knight, AIA. Steve is principal with David M. Schwartz Architects. He studied at North Carolina State University, where he received his Master of Architecture. That same year, he joined David M. Schwartz Architects. Steve primarily focuses on his firm's performing arts venue projects. He served as project architect for the design of Schermerhorn Symphony Center, the Palladium at the Center for the Performing Arts, the Gilliard Center, and most recently an 8,000-seat amphitheater in Huntsville, Alabama. He's currently leading the office's team designing the Neighborhood Center for Chevy Chase Lake in Maryland and the multi-phase residential college project at Vanderbilt University. Steve is active in preservation advocacy, serving as president of the Art Deco Society of Washington and on the board of the International Coalition of Art Deco Societies. Steve lives in Silver Spring, Maryland. Tonight, we will focus on David M. Schwartz Architects' Nicholas S. Zeppos College Building at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. And last but not least, Morris Adjmi at AIA. Morris is founder and principal of Morris Adjmi Architects. After studying architecture at Tulane University, where he received his Master of Architecture, he began his career working with Pritzker Prize-winning Italian architect Aldo Rossi. In 1986, they opened the Studio di Architettura in New York. Adjmi and Rossi collaborated on many international projects. In 1997, Morris opened his own architecture and interior design firm in New York City. His firm is recognized for its industrial and modernist design sense, as well as its inclusion of contemporary art and sustainable elements. Morris Adjmi Architects has worked on commercial, residential, and hospitality projects in New York City and beyond, many of which have been widely published. Their work includes the Wythe Hotel in Williamsburg, the Theory Building in the Meatpacking District, NYU Wilf Hall in Greenwich Village, Front New York in Dumbo, and the Rockaway Hotel. Morris Adjmi calls New York City his home. Tonight we will focus on Morris Adjmi Architects' project called the Grand Mulberry in Little Italy, Manhattan. And those are our four very talented panelists. Thank you very much for being here. All right, I guess we can wrap it up. Okay, so Steve Knight, we talked today about design. So let's start with design and design problems or design challenges, right? Every project, when we start a job, every project has a design challenge or a design problem. So we say to ourselves, okay, this is what we're trying to achieve. So how did your use of brick become part of the solution to a particular design challenge? Oh, that's so great. Well, you know, let's back up. So earlier today, we talked a little bit about the size of the architecture and the fact that had you decided that that building was going to be entirely limestone, it would make absolutely no sense, right? And we also talked a little bit about the color of the brick, the scale of the brick, the various patterns, etc. So why don't you elaborate on that? And actually give us a little background on the building. Sure.
Thanks for the kind.
Absolutely.
So the background of the project, Vanderbilt University approached the firm a number of years ago. They were interested in undertaking a master plan study to really re-envision how student life unfolded on campus. And after some study and looking at some precedents and a lot of meetings and conversations, they settled on what's known as the residential college model of student housing, where students are, in essence, the broader university community is broken down into smaller groups of a couple hundred people. Studies have shown that it's just a much more familiar size of group for students to feel comfortable, to build relationships, to really build a positive, long-term, holistic education experience. So we looked at a number of precedents and examples for that. We looked at a broad variety of vernaculars of different styles of architecture, and concluded that stitching the colleges within the kind of the collegiate Gothic established tradition of higher education, which has great roots in Europe and then comes over to the States in the early part of the 20th century with the Ivy League schools. That was the tradition they wanted to redeem themselves in. So I guess we think of this largely as a communication problem. It's what's the right image for the university to present to the outward-facing community, students, prospective students, and parents. And maybe to be a little more crass about it, it's kind of a marketing problem because higher education is a big deal. It's very expensive, and schools need to position themselves and distinguish themselves. So I think it was both that image problem and that kind of that organizational, cultural, university cultural problem that the residential college model was the response to, and very much the look of the building is in response to that. And I think we use brick in particular as a material. It's very familiar. It can be very warm. We made very specific choices using a molded brick with a grapevine joint that really helps. It just feels very warm and approachable. It's exactly what one would want for what is largely a residential environment.
Was the use of brick ever in question for the job? When you guys got started, did you know you were going to make it out of brick, or at least partially out of brick?
I think it was probably an early aspiration to use a lot more stone, a lot more limestone. It is a rich palette. It's a combination of brick, limestone, and a local native stone called crab orchard. And I think we aspired to do more stone because that just felt, oh, that's a nicer building, stone building. But I think the reality of budget entered into it. And I think ultimately we're very happy that we were sort of pushed in that direction of incorporating brick into the palette, because I think it makes it a much more interesting and lively building. I think there's a lot of inherent opportunities within brick that we could be employed at that opportunity.
So you're saying it brought out a lot of opportunities. Did it create any design challenges? Was there anything about brick or using brick and limestone together that was challenging or unknown? Was there anything unusual about that?
From a design standpoint, I mean, we really pride ourselves on being really good students and really studying precedents and studying traditions. So I think we were comfortably versed that it wasn't a particular design challenge. Perhaps more of an execution challenge, because trades have gotten so subdivided and separated in modern society. You go to one person to lay stone, another person to lay brick, and somebody else to do something else. So we were looking to one trade, a mason trade, to do all of that on the facade at the same time. So I think it's really hats off to the contractors for finding good qualified, experienced craftspeople to pull it off.
Thank you. Mateus, we talked a little bit today about the use of brick in your project in the H house. And I think, it sounded to me like that had a lot to do with it's not maybe an existential issue with where your folks were from, and finding something that was familiar to them. Could you talk a little bit about that? No, can you guys hear Mateus?
Yeah, this is fine. Yeah. Great. So a bit of background on the project as well, I suppose. So the site of the project is located in a neighborhood that used to be part of a lot of kind of agrarian sort of history. So it was a lot of farmland, a lot of fields used for agricultural cultivation. So it's a small, really kind of township outside of a main metropolitan city in Canada. And so all those small farm villages closed and sort of shut down years and years ago. And so the area kind of heavily treed and forested over time. And so a new neighborhood was kind of built in this forested area of 2-acre properties in these sort of large, very formal houses. And so the question then of introducing a kind of a new sort of form of architecture within this context was really how do we bridge this sort of relationship to the kind of agrarian past of the site with this kind of new context of these large properties on 2-acre kind of sites. So the project is really in reference to a lot of those types of agrarian structures, the familiarity of the kind of typical sort of A-frame form that then kind of sits itself within a scale that is represented by the kind of neighboring properties. And so on top of sort of that kind of bridging between these two contexts was the client's kind of interest in sort of understanding if there could be a sort of nostalgic representation of their past. So they are from Eastern Europe, and so a lot of the projects that they, or a lot of the homes that they sort of were surrounded by in their upbringing in Eastern Europe were these sort of clay village homes, right, where the kind of clay structure was the sort of load-bearing mass that exuded itself as a finish. And so it was about taking that as a sort of nostalgic representation and translating it over to this project. And in that, we found a really beautiful marriage where building a project like this within a neighborhood that the project can present itself quite starkly. Brick was really kind of used as a medium to, as Steve sort of put it, it's a familiar medium. It's a medium that feels inviting and has a vernacular quality to it that allows the sort of formal logic of the building to really sensitize into its context. Especially kind of working with a sort of a natural tone to the brick, this kind of clay smoked color, it invites this sort of historical precedent, this sort of traditional precedent, and I think that really embodies what we try to do with our work, which is introduce new sort of modern forms of living that might take on massing that harkens to some sense of ancestry, but really presents a new modality for architecture, but is expressed in these really traditional forms of building and traditional forms of materiality.
So when you guys initially decided you were going to use brick, did you have any challenges in your mind thinking, okay, well, I want to do a contemporary building. How am I going to use brick?
Yeah, it's we strategize a fine line of if we're trying to create a project that exudes a certain type of presence, where can we begin to find moments where the material takes a little bit more of a contemporary expression, while still sort of respecting the fact that it's trying to be a very simple kind of load-bearing mass. And so we found little small opportunities for that were presented as challenges in the project, but we saw them as these interesting kind of areas where we could explore how brick could begin to defy its kind of general purposes. So in certain parts of the project, the brick comes down to grade and has this really solidified sort of mass, and then other instances, the brick kind of starts to gently cantilever, for example, on the kind of entryway to the project. The brick starts to kind of encapsulate the sort of visitor to the home and sort of draw them in. And this sort of like gentle levitation is a sort of moment where we can start to express the brick as a more contemporary medium using the building technology.
That's a great way to put it. Gentle levitation.
Yeah.
I like that. So, well, thank you very much. So, Isaac, your Morgan Park project is quite large. There's a lot of brick out there. Can you talk about any of the design challenges that you might have been presented with when you started the job?
I think most of our clients are New York City developers. Most New York City developers are adverse to risk. Brick is very traditional. It's a known fact, known value. For this particular one, our client wanted something timeless. So timeless, is, and brick kind of go together pretty well. It's a big project, residential rental building in Mineola. And we wanted to own the fact that it was a large project. We didn't want to break it up, as something sometimes happens where you feel like materials are just pasted on, just to break up the volume. Here's like, it's big, we own it, and we use the brick and the detailing of it to break up within that one material. And I think, it turned out pretty well. The inspiration are mill buildings of the area, so between the brick and more glass than you would typically, you get to a good result.
So in terms of we know you use brick, but in terms of the color of the brick, the type of brick, the size of brick, the brick units, because there's some restrictions on cost.
It's always.
Are you guys told, like, this is what we're gonna be doing out there?
We're happy when we don't end up with a jumbo Norman brick. So this is not, we're good. It's great. And we worked with, skilled craftsmen, masons, and specialty bricks as well. So, depending on the project and depending on the clients, you try to use brick, because I'm realizing I'm coming here, I'm like, we do a lot of building. And walking here from Javits Center, where I was earlier, there's tons of brick buildings. So how do you keep reinventing that using the same material? And brick, I think, allows you to keep reinventing it.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, outside of brick, are there other materials that you guys ultimately clad buildings in, or you really get pigeonholed?
No, there's many.
Okay.
There's many metal panels, stone
Okay.
panels, depending on the vibe.
Okay.
But I'll just mention another project we just finished in Tribeca, where we received the same comments that we did in Mineola, where some people walking by are like, oh wow, great renovation. Like it's been there before, and you're like, no, this is a new building. But in a way, it fits. It fits the area, it fits the neighborhood, and it was meant to be there.
Well, what's interesting about this project is the window openings are really large, and you're still using brick, and clearly it's cladding, right? It's a steel structure.
Concrete, yeah.
Okay, it's a concrete structure. But it's, you wouldn't think, well, we're gonna make this building out of brick, and we're still gonna be able to. 75 years ago, and still have these large openings, so it's interesting how people see these buildings and they say, well, I guess they said the same thing about your building.
Well, industrial buildings, you forget, that there is that vernacular of some larger openings. So we're tying to that and using the technology as today.
Right. Thank you. So Morris, the Grand Mulberry, clearly there was a lot of thought that went into those facades. So there was a design challenge or a design problem. Could you speak to that?
Sure. First of all, thank you, and thank you everybody for being here. Also, I just want to thank Brittany McComber, who was the project manager for that project, and a couple other people, Michelle, Sergey, William, Shiki, Brandon, Tony, Christian, and Stefan, who we're working with in his own firm. Just want to thank all the friends and everybody else here. That way, give me a few seconds to think what I'm answering. Because you said you were going to say the hardest question for me, but I think they said I started working with Aldo Rossi, and a lot of the work that we did initially was in landmark historic districts, new buildings in historic districts. And what I learned there was this idea that you can propose and you can build new buildings in historic settings. Historic districts weren't frozen in time, and that it's our responsibility to tell a story and to connect our buildings to the past and to the fabric of the city. This was not an historic district, and I think from that experience, we always try to look at the context, look at history, and look at the time, the formative years of those neighborhoods as inspiration for the project. And so we like our buildings to be modern, but also to recall something of the past and not to feel like they're stuck in the past. And how can we make that connection and make it in a way that speaks to our time? And so we started looking at a way that we could relate to Little Italy. It's a special district, it's not a historic district, so we had limits in terms of the height and setbacks and things like that. But the building is surrounded by a lot of tenement buildings, and those are the buildings that you really feel the presence of, and the history of, and the story of how those neighborhoods developed. And so we wanted that to be part of the story of this building and the facade. And we looked at a number of different ways that we could render that drawing, or that image of the tenements on the building. And so you can see that the dome bricks, which we might also call broad bricks, because
Broad bricks, right.
we call them dome bricks.
Yeah.
But how could we use those to, we started actually with a series of studies of different ways that we could render that drawing on the building. First with two different types of stone, a smooth and a rough stone. Then we had ceramic discs. And then we looked at ways that we could do it with shapes. And then this idea of a pixel that could be used to draw the shapes that you would see that surrounded the window. So there are two different geometries on the facade. One is the geometry of this image of a tenement facade, and then the other is the modern facade, which is overlaid on top. And they misregister, so you see that tension between the past and the future. And we drew every brick. There were, I think, 31 shapes. If you look at page 8 in your folder, you can find diagrams that show all of those shapes that we used in the building. And it was great working with Glen-Gery. This is a plug for Glen-Gery. You never worked with them, but they really embraced the idea, and we were able to create a really special project. And it's a small building, but we love the sort of power that it presents.
Did you model the building in 3D and then show it to the clients, or were they strictly two-dimensional images that were shown to the clients?
Well, I mean, some of the panels alluded to this, but they were really happy when we went from two different stones to brick. They were like, yeah, we can get behind the brick budget. Yeah, so, but we think it was really actually more effective with the brick because it's monochromatic, and we worked to get the matching brick. Mortar color, and then you really see the effect of the shapes throughout the day, like with the different, with the shade and the shadow and different sun usage.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit. First, we talked about design. So let's move to details. I'm going to go right back to Morris.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, I'm interested in, well, let me read my question first so I remember what we're talking about. So I was thinking, when I was thinking about these questions, I've been an architect for over 25 years. And I'm humbled like every day. I walk out into the field, when I do walk out into the field, and I love to ask the contractor, when there's a question, I always ask the contractor, well, what would you do? I love to hear their responses because I know I'm always going to learn something. So even after, over 25 years, I think, this is crazy. Like, how is it that I'm 54 and I'm still learning how to be a good architect, right? And it's really all in the details. I also think that's why making modern architecture can be a lot more difficult than doing traditional work because you're hiding everything. Everything's you gotta make it as simple as possible, right? So anyway, that's a discussion for another day. So everything comes down to building details. So what were some of the unique brick construction details that came about to achieve the aesthetic results you were all looking for? So let's start with Morris.
we just had to develop, we had a simple idea, but in order to achieve our goals, we had to come up with a whole series of shapes that would enable us to do that. So each brick is actually is a double brick with a fake joint that we actually mortared in. And then that's the,
You can see it over there,
the
yeah.
pair of domes. And then we had a single one, we had a curved one, there's a couple of curves on the building corner and the entry piece. So it was really developing that kit of parts to render the drawing the way we wanted to do that. So it's pretty typical, in the sense of the way it was laid, but it was a special shape that gave it the depth.
How long did it take you guys to get there? To nail that shape down?
Well, I think, there's a couple of, probably 2 to 3 months to come up with the concept of we're using the brick and then developing the drawings. I mean, every brick is mapped on the facade. And the masons were really excited. When we'd go there, they were really, they had a puzzle, they had a drawing that they were then translating into a building. And they were really excited about that process.
Did you have trouble finding good masons?
We had done another project also in New York with a very intricate series of brick details. So it was a facade that had 3 different patterns and one special brick. It was an L-shaped brick which made a checkerboard, so you could just lay it. And the masons on that job were really great, so we suggested to the owner to use the same
Okay.
construction company and masons. But
Yeah, I mean, I found, we were talking about this earlier today, I found it's just really challenging to find people that are good at masonry today. So maybe it's a little easier in the city, I don't know.
No. We had a building where the first floor didn't have any brick on it, we had to rip it out. So, a lot of times,
Right.
You don't get a good crew. So, yeah.
Could you talk a little bit more, we'll wait for the image, we don't have to wait for the image to come up, but the window opening. So you've got, is that a piece of stone that surrounds the windows?
That's aluminum.
It's aluminum, okay.
Yeah. It's all brick. It's a tilted turn window set into the facade and projects slightly forward of the brick plane to create a shadow.
Yeah.
And give it its own.
And acts as a drip.
Yes. Yeah.
Steve, there's a lot going on the facades of your architecture out there. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Inspired tower? Yeah. Yes. Well, I used the term rich palette of materials earlier, and I think we tried to carry that through the layers within the brick itself. It's not just one brick, but it's actually a blend of 3 bricks. We were really interested in just getting the right amount of modeling and subtle variation from one brick to the next, because if it had been one brick color, it just would have been too sort of monolithic. And we also employed iron spot brick to create some of the decorative detail. And much like the dome brick, it just gives a life to the facade, because it's constantly changing depending on what light is doing and how it's hitting it. One of the most extraordinary things about the project was the client's desire to really make, this is one of 4 colleges that's on a major avenue in Nashville, and they really wanted this to be a signpost to the entire city. And that this is a city that's just, it's growing like crazy. It's a different city now than it was 5 years ago when we broke ground on that building that's now finished. And so there is this program for visiting scholars and faculty, and we decided to stack it into this 300-foot tower, which is to pull that off in that aesthetic, in that style, that vernacular, it's quite a challenge because you have to simultaneously scale up and think about detail and color and pattern at a much broader level. But at the same time, it all has to be within the appropriate character of the building. I think it was a real challenge to figure out how to thread the brick and the stone together in the right way to get the top to really be the right punctuation mark.
Did you have any challenges? So talk a little bit about the construction method, the wall systems out there, and the layer of brick on the exterior.
It's very much a modern construction method. It's modern cavity wall construction. There's concrete superstructure, metal studs, dense glass, rigid insulation. It's the same stuff we all know, and really, but we had to. This had to be a modern building that met modern energy standards and modern standards of dealing with vapor and air and moisture infiltration. So resolving all of that was the flashing details, as you can imagine, are pretty incredible. And we had really good engineers that really helped us. I mean, they really helped stitch everything together. Not only does it look like an architecture that's stitching, but just stitching together all the different trades and the materials, there's a lot of technical challenges there.
Yeah, the limestone details are striking out here. Talk a little bit about the fact that you were able to find somebody or you had somebody that you'd like to work with.
Yeah, there's a great tradition of carved limestone that comes out of central or southern Indiana. It's Indiana limestone. There's one firm there we've worked with quite a bit on a number of our projects, and they've just really, they're one of the few firms, I mean, we talk about that, how it's sometimes hard to find people, but they're one of the few firms that really specializes in the really intricate carving, and they have a number of really dedicated craftspeople. I visited their shop a number of times, and I mean, these people are true artists. I mean, during breaks, they'll be doing these interesting doodles with markers on the break room tables, and they're just incredibly talented people. They love what they do.
That's nice to hear. Mateus, so there were some really subtle details on your building, particularly the cantilevers and these large openings on the facade, one window flanking the other, and then other materials in between. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think our interest as a studio is actually, how to tone down detailing as much as possible, and really work directly with our contractors and with our trades from the outset to start to kind of develop the language of the building and the detailing of the building as we sort of go along. We were just talking backstage about, do contractors actually follow details that right happen? And so, we try to keep the way in which we approach detailing a building, a house project, to a sort of series of simple kind of conventional ideas that represent, let's say 4 or 5 details of ways in which you approach the project. And then we really, structure the design process about, in a way that involves a conversation with the client, with the contractor, with the trades, really early before the project, ever starts, to be able to start to, get everyone engaged in how to build this thing, and how to make it approachable for really almost generating a kind of a prototype for sort of building this. And that kind of represents the way in which we think about, the architecture as a totality, and that, how do we make these really kind of interesting and engaging pieces of architecture using really conventional methodologies and traditional building systems. So, this house is just wood frame stick built, and uses as minimum amount of steel as possible to achieve, some of these overhangs or cantilevers or things like this. We really, in kind of keeping with the notion of thinking about, the referential degree to which, the architecture looks at the past, we extend that kind of conversation towards tradespeople in building, right? So if you You can think about the sort of poetry of a farmer who has his land and wants to build a structure to house his hay or something like that. He's building it. He's coming up with the details and he's figuring it out. I think we try to look at it in the same kind of way, and in terms of sort of thinking about how to look at a piece of architecture and digest it and build it with people and design it with the people who are actually building it. And in that sense, it becomes something that represents a prototype that can kind of be repeated and extended to different kind of contractors and trades, and look at it as something that can influence the way in which we build architecture. To that degree, I think we're trying to find, as well as I think a lot of Canadian studios are a sort of a vernacular Canadian architecture. What does it mean to build Canadian architecture? And thinking about these really simple ways in which to engage the detailing of the building, and doing so using really modest materials like brick, I think is where we sit as a sort of thesis for our work.
That's a great segue. Isaac, I remember reading in Folio too, that a lot of consideration went into the details on the piers on the exterior facade. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, our project architect, this one, Glen-Gery who in this hybrid world now is working for us from Israel, so couldn't be here tonight. But he reminded me that he went out before, obviously the details were drawn, but before they actually started getting built, he had meetings with the masons on site, so that everyone was on the same page and got comments from them and incorporated those comments, which facilitated the end product. I think one of the main advantages of brick is that you can take, let's call it, a simple material in the good sense, and in this case we had a few custom bricks, not that many, and you can use that by detailing correctly to change the appearance and to make it so that the light hits it a certain way. In our project, we needed to break up this mass. So by using simple articulation, we were able to do that.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, you're changing the coursing type and you're changing the
Checker
position,
pattern.
of the bricks.
Yeah, rotating the brick.
Right.
It's simple moves, but
Did you go through a series of options with the client or in-house before you chose, okay, this is
yeah,
what we're
we
going to make here?
between us, with the clients, with the
Yeah.
masons.
Okay, that's great. Okay, on to our third question. So we talked about design challenges and their resolution in detail. Now let's take a closer look at the thinking behind your use of brick. What considerations were given when choosing brick for the facade? And I know these are going to overlap a little bit on the first two, so bear with me. So what considerations were given when choosing brick for the facade? Was it historic, location, weather, price, aesthetics, or something else? Isaac, why don't you go?
All of the
All of the above. What was
think-
really important?
No, I think for architecture, it's always, it's, everything I think needs to be site specific in what the intent of the building is. I'll go back to the hotel in Tribeca we just finished, that finally opened. When somebody says, this looks like it's always been there, and it's in a historic district, that's, for us, for that particular building, and for this one as well, brick was the obvious choice, and for all the other reasons as well. But the material was the obvious choice.
So I'm interested in weather specifically. We've got old factory warehouses, right? And brick weathers a certain way. And then we've got new brick buildings and people still look at them and say, hey, that looks like it's been there for a long time. I don't know because I don't use brick that much in my architecture. How do those materials weather over time? Is it different per the type of brick or color you're using out there?
Yeah, I think it depends on the brick, but the initial choice in those particular cases was for it to look weathered already.
Okay.
And I think, brick affords you, if you just look at it around here, you have so many choices. It's a big
Right.
bump. It's a little overwhelming sometimes.
Yeah, I bet. I wouldn't want to have all those samples in my office. There'd be room for nothing else. Mateus. Of course. What considerations were given when choosing brick for the facade? I know we discussed this. Historic location, weather, price, aesthetic, something else.
Yeah, the main thing I think all of the above, right? The sheer notion of durability of brick, I think, is just interesting to us as architects, but also to clients, right? Because clients are, engaged in this this notion of, what materials do they not have to worry about 10, 15, 20, 30 years from now, right? What requires as little maintenance as possible, and what actually looks better with age. So brick really responds to that kind of series of questions in a really natural and organic way. And in the selection of brick, I touched upon that sort of before in terms of where parking back to sort of style preferences of architecture and things like that. But also, this term that's been floating around this panel a little bit has been timelessness. How do we create buildings that feel like they've been there for a while and will continue to age with grace? In the case of Beach House, we chose a kind of smoked velour brick that already has this natural patina built into it a little bit and creates this nice kind of variety of color that almost looks weathered to a degree, as kind of mentioned the project as well. And and if you kind of extend that conversation around timelessness past just the selection of brick, we can look at the 4 projects on screen here. They all sort of reference traditional thinking about architecture in different ways, whether they be kind of representations of a kind of warehouse typology of the building, whether they're referencing really archaic ways of covering 4 walls with a sloped roof, or whether they're kind of sort of painting a facade with 2 different moments of architectural sort of elevational qualities, as Morris's project does, right? They're thinking about the past, they're referencing the past in different ways. And I think to that degree, there creates this sort of timeless quality to the project in which brick lends itself well as a medium to sort of work within that language. And perhaps it's coincidental, or maybe this was pre-planned by the good folks at Brickworks in Glen-Gery, but all the bricks on these projects are also in a reddish maroon clay tone.
Yeah, interesting.
Why is that? Why are we as architects interested in material as its most organic and pure expression? And for brick, it is that sort of color that feels familiar to people. And I think that kind of shows in the work that's associated.
It's a great answer. I'm thinking about your clients and the issues they may have had with cost, right? So when we drive through rural America and we see a brick home, many times it's a veneer it's just a thin veneer, right? But you guys used full bricks out there. Talk a little bit about the choice of using a typical brick wall construction out there rather than adding, just making it a simple veneer. A thin veneer.
It's, the option of using just a base veneer is applicable to us, right? The main veneer is not glue bearing either. But from a kind of insulative quality, from a sort of building tectonic quality and wall assembly sort of durability.
Okay.
Usually the construction will deal with kind of modular bricks as opposed to just a base veneer. But the kind of selection of it was also outside of just cost, was reflective of trying to find a brick that read well within its context, right? Of it being actually familiar as a familiar size, which is why the brick ends up being modular. Initially we had actually specified for the project a kind of Roman brick shape, something that was really kind of extended the horizontal language of the project and had a much more kind of contemporary expression. We actually gravitated towards the modular because of how sort of traditional it is in its form and in its shape and in its proportions. We were interested in that as an expression of sort of familiarity with the building material.
Right, that's great. Steve, we know that you use brick partially because it's historically relevant. Were there other reasons that you guys chose brick out there?
There's a lot of brick on campus, so it's, I think the most, it's a campus that goes back to the 1870s, so it's been there a long time. There are buildings of all the different kinds. Pretty much use brick.
So a building that large, to go back to price, a building that large, using brick instead of all limestone, how would that compare? Right. I said that just because I wanted to see your face.
No,
Right.
20%.
Okay.
20% is not, it's not a small number.
Morris, what do you have to add to that question?
I would have to, oh, sorry. I think all of the above is the proper.
For all of you guys, yeah,
response.
sure.
But I think, and I love brick and we do a lot of work with brick. I think the question becomes, once you decide you want to use brick, what do you want to do?
Okay.
Because there's so many options. In terms of the fabrication, whether they're extruded or handmade or pressed, texture, color, you alluded to, talked about the color. And then, you know, patterns, and, you know, we strove to make this as monolithic as possible in this particular case, in terms of like the brick color, as well as the watercolor, so it really read as one sort of material with the bosses or the domes giving the light and character to the facade, as opposed to competing with a blend of different colors. But you know, I think that's what makes brick so exciting, is all of those options. But yeah, you have to work it, what the story is, and then weave that into the narrative of the design.
Well said. I'm wondering, I haven't worked with many other brick companies. I know Glen-Gery because it's all over Pennsylvania. And I went to Penn State, and I understand, as I understand it, most of the buildings, the brick buildings at Penn State are Glen-Gery brick. Would I have the same opportunity to make custom bricks like that with another business like you guys did? I mean, did you choose Glen-Gery for that reason?
We've done a ton of projects with Glen-Gery, and it's been very easy to work with them. Not just because they do it, but that's the truth.
Yeah.
So, and they have different facilities and different fabrication techniques in the different facilities. So I think they tried to pair us and do this brick in one of the plans that was appropriate for this. So yeah, and we did this other, the one that's on the cover with the checkerboard. We also did with that, and they were great to work with.
It's good to hear. So I think we can move on to our fourth question. And I think it's a question, well, I know it's a question that's kind of top of mind for everybody out there, many professionals and their clients, and that's sustainability. So brick is clearly a time-tested material. What are the sustainable aspects of brick that were enticing for the project? For example, color, texture, thermal code, zoning compliance, etc. Morris, you want to try that one first? Is it way outside of what we're discussing? Yeah, let me ask you this. Is it something that your clients even ask you about?
I think it's our responsibility, whether they ask or not, to think about it and to try and slip something into the project to make it more sustainable and more energy efficient. We've used bricks that were made from reclaimed industrial waste. It's something that
Really?
we've been talking to Glen-Gery and brickworks about, maybe doing something that could take materials that would normally go into landfill and use them to make bricks. There are cements that can clean the environment, so maybe those bricks could be made to do similar tasks. So I think that brick is a tried and true material, and you've spoken about the history of brick, and I think the connection to the hand making is something that makes it special and warm and tangible, as opposed to an all glass building which has less character or connection to people and a lot of other problems. But I think we can push bricks to do more, and I think we use them because they already offer a lot of sustainable characteristics, but I think we can do more.
What kind of materials are they talking about using to recycle and make bricks?
Well, these ones we used were like industrial waste and batteries.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's pretty interesting. And they're probably last just as long as a typical masonry brick.
Yeah, you have to change them.
Right, you can run the whole building on the bricks. Steve, what role did sustainability have in your project, if any?
It was a goal of the client. The college actually attained the platinum certification just last month.
Wow.
So we were really pleased with that. I would say that how brick fit into that puzzle. One of the lead credits is sourcing materials within a certain mile radius. To meet that with most of the brick selections, that it's a broad number of bricks in the project that we managed to meet that goal. But I think the overarching goal for us and how we think about sustainability is it's durability and timelessness. We've heard both of those words repeatedly tonight. It's an inherently durable material. This building, the way it's built in detail, it's going to be around for a couple hundred years. One of the most sustainable things you can do is to really build with conviction and honestly the right amount of ego. I mean, you have to really believe in what you're doing in this statement. If you believe in it strongly enough, others will believe in it. And honestly, it's a building that's familiar, and I think the material plays into that. And it's hopefully a building that people will love and want to care for 100 years. And maybe just to do something else.
Thank you. Mateus, we talked a little bit about sustainability today in the house and how important it was for your clients. Could you fill us in a little bit on
In the case of H-House, the use of brick, I think, outside of the durability of brick, the fact that you have to look at changing the material after a certain number of years, that's really as far as we push into the selection of brick in terms of the sustainability conversation. But the design of the project, I think we tried to look at ways in which we can create a lot of passive sort of systems of sustainability as opposed to active systems. So really thinking about how to passively design the house so that the use of energy is kept at a sort of minimum. So to that degree, I think one of the biggest points we tried to make about the design of the house was the necessity for it to cross ventilate. So the house is no wider than 35 feet from end to end. So that allows us to kind of create proper windows on the other side and actually create cross ventilation to the space, which in the warmer months doesn't have the house using as much kind of forced air, so as to sort of keep costs down in terms of the sort of energy intensity of the project itself. That plus, we really thought about creating a very tight envelope of the project. So outside of the kind of the sort of adaptations that sort of root the house to the site on the other side, the living quarters are actually contained all within that single bar at the center of the project. And so that allows the sort of air movement through the house to be continuous and cyclical. and it creates a really sort of habitable living environment where you don't have to, keep turning up your heat or keep turning up your cooling in different parts of the house to keep it regularized, right? That the house feels active in a way that it's kind of breathing and cooling and heating and things like that. And we tried to, keeping with some passive approach to the house, we tried to ensure that we had a really tight building envelope, which the brick obviously perfecting that. But having in our value that really trying to keep everything inside. I mean, it's in this area where the project is located in Canada, it can get quite cold.
Yeah, I bet.
So having a really tight envelope from an air tightness perspective and from a thermal perspective, I think was important to us as well to kind of reach that sustainability goal for the product.
Have you checked back with the clients in terms of air circulation and how the shape of the project is, if it's worked out for them?
That's one of the things actually they keep reporting back.
They do?
Is how much lower their energy bills are.
Really?
And how they feel that the quality of the air in the space is different. So
Yeah.
they used to live in a house that had a very workplace, not a lot of natural light coming in the house, and a lot of thermostats and multiple furnaces to control the sort of temperature and volume of air in the space. And that I think is sort of the remark that they feel the most. So, from when you're working with one individual client on a project like a house, you can be really specific about the interests of that client and the way they want to live. And in this condition, the clients saw sustainability as a means to really reduce their carbon footprint.
It's got to be really rewarding, right? To have a client living in a house, you have the design objective, it's being fulfilled, you hear about it. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that, really.
Like being in the space, it's
Yeah.
all right, we check one box.
That's as good as it gets. Thank you. Isaac, so does sustainability ever enter the mind of the developer?
It's a very good question. Going back to, I think, if I could more correctly, slipping it in a little bit, right? Which is, what we try to do as well. So we try to push the sustainable envelope as much as we can, slip it in. It really depends on the client, on the developer. And I think there's a different mindset, often between condo developers, rental developers, because developers have been doing rentals and keep that building for a long time.
Okay.
And they're going to be, they're going to want, the maintenance of it to be as minimal as possible and the energy efficiency to be as good as possible.
Yeah.
So in this case, it was rentals.
That's interesting. So energy efficiency is going to be really important. I mean, it's important for somebody who's buying a building, somebody that's going to own that building for a long time and be renting or leasing.
Yeah, and as far as going back to the brick, as far as the maintenance of it, more maintenance is.
Right. Awesome. I just have one more question, just kind of as an aside. I was thinking about it today earlier when I was talking to Steve. Do we see brick on the interior of any of your buildings? We talked a lot about brick on the facades, but do we see it on the interior of any of the architecture? Anybody wants to talk about that?
I would say yes. We did a project in Washington D.C. and we used there were a number of, it was a plumbing warehouse and they had a number of buildings on the site. We reclaimed all the brick and reused all the brick inside the buildings. So, yeah. And a lot of times maybe to bring some continuity from the facade into the lobby or parts of the building.
So using brick on the interior, is it challenging because you now have to pour footings for those on the inside of the building rather than just the perimeter of the building? Does that affect planning? I mean, how does that happen?
I don't remember having to do any special details for that. I mean, detail, yes, but not any special footing.
Okay. Steve?
Yeah, so the college that's featured here is one of four, and they're all in this collegiate Gothic vernacular. But we've tried to distinguish each one a little bit from the others, give it its own identity. And on the interior of the last one that's currently under construction, the dining hall will be fully clad in brick. And we're actually using thin brick because it's just sort of much more simpatico.
Okay, so it's veneer. It's a thin veneer.
But everybody's really excited to see this roof.
I bet.
Never done anything.
Is it the same color as the exterior?
No, it's variations.
Okay.
I would say it's, we looked at it quite a bit. It's what you would expect to find on the design of the building, that kind of a brick. So,
And do clients typically have those kinds of requests? I'm talking to people who are architects, and they're not normally, they don't typically hear these conversations go on. Do clients request that kind of thing, or is that something an architect decides, this is what I'd like to do?
I'd say this was already crazy.
Yeah, good.
And they're fully along for the ride.
Thank you. There we go. We got a mic out there? There you go.
So I guess one of the great questions in using brick in the exterior is how you do with inevitable efflorescence, and whether that showed up after your construction. Precautions you take to avoid that.
Efflorescence was the question. And is that something that every brick project has, or any of the projects you guys have worked on?
We've certainly seen it. We typically think it's beyond the design.
I don't know, is that from there to here?
Beyond the architect's control. It's primarily about, we've found it's moisture infiltration during construction. If you're not properly protecting the walls as they're laying them up, they get heavy rain. You just get lots of moisture and it's got to come back out. Most of the time it will find its way out and stop for a period of time. Short-term problem.
Please.
Coming from like an architecture's perspective, do you guys have any kind of favorite component to your structures that you were excited to see, kind of come to life? Whether it come, into the detailing or maybe even envisioning the tenants in the space that you're kind of excited for. I feel like, after a certain amount of time, you start to become personally connected to it. So I'm just curious.
I don't know if I'm going to answer your question exactly, but going through the process is such a long process. It's like having kids, right? So at the end, they're on their way when the building is done, and they live their own life. And if it's a hotel, you always have like a drink on the roof and enjoy it, whatever. But it's their own life. It's just really kind of cool because you go through this whole process of creation and then all.
Yeah, it's the same way. I think it's we labor about the sort of execution of these projects, and we put out ideas of how we think they're going to be used. But I think for us as well, the employment is really what kind of life is the project they run out. How are their sort of wants and moments in the kind of everyday condition, or how people interact with the spaces and live in them, which produce all these which we didn't even conceive of. Oftentimes what's not designed is what's the best thing about a project.
Okay, guys, that's it for questions, I believe. Okay, that's the first time I've gotten I've got like 20 texts here. My phone shut off every time, so from not being able to hear me to all kinds of other things, my apologies. So we've got a winner for the golden ticket, is that correct as well? Okay. Jacob Goldman. Unbelievable. Congratulations. So many thanks to Glen-Gery for the opportunity to use this space as a venue, and all of our guests for coming this evening. You guys are all really talented. Your buildings are wonderful. Thank you very much for being here.
Can I just add one thing? Brittany, I didn't see her before. She is here, right there. So if you want to talk about our building, you can go find her. And also Rosanna, who's very shy.
Oh, that's great. Calling out employees.
Yeah, you can see her.
That's great. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.